Modern Eater Network production. Hell yeah. Let's get this party hopping. No more milling around. Get ready to have a mash ton of fun. Here are your hosts, Andrew Moore and Jeff Tyler.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beer Craft. This is Colorado's craft beer show. We're here live at Studio Kitchen, Colorado, home of the Modern Eater, and we're talking about beer that may or may not be beer this month. We have a great guest, Dr. Keith Villa, on the show today, founder of Ceria, and we're going to get to him in a minute and chat about a really unique product that he has. But yeah, we're talking to some pretty interesting people this month. We're talking about some kind of boundary blurring beverages, if you will. We talked to Judd from Dos Luces a few weeks back about his chicha and pulque, which is a corn-based beer beverage, and that's kind of a historical example of a beer that's been resurrected. And this week we're going to talk about something that's really new and innovative and hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I think that was part of what was fun about Judd's interview in the last show was that, he was able to come back and say, yes, this is beer, and it's older beer than the Western European beer that we so often hold up as sort of the epitome of the definition.
Yeah. But still a modern interpretation. And that's, I think, what I like about what Dos Luces is doing is they're saying, yeah, we're taking this cultural tradition, but we really want to put a fresh spin on it. We don't just want to do it for the sake of doing it. We want to do it so that people enjoy it, and it's kind of a fresh take on it, which is a fun way to innovate.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to have sort of a month or two of talking to people who are really pushing boundaries in other areas of beer, because I feel like, like at Spice Trade and Intrepid, we're thinking a lot about spices and food and sort of, beer as a culinary object. And it's interesting to me to see some of these other, fantastic pioneers who think about beer in different ways and always sort of pushing that bubble out what we talk about when we talk about beer.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we should probably crack a beer. You brought a couple of beers with you. I feel like
it's hard to have a beer show and not drink some beer. So
true.
We'll crack some beer and what's going on at Spice Trade this week? Anything new and exciting?
We're making beer, we're drinking beer. It's just a lot of stuff in the works right now. Not a ton of stuff to update on, particularly at the moment. But we're working on keeping all of our summer beers out. We're working on our new brew pub, which will be opening this fall. I feel like we got a lot in the works, and probably 6 months or so down the road, we'll have a great new brewery for everyone to come enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting.
And you guys just had your anniversary party.
We did.
2 years.
Saturday, I'm still recovering. But yeah, we just had our 2-year anniversary at Intrepid. So it was a good time. We had great weather, good friends, good beer. It was fun. We'll be doing it again in 12 months.
Sounds good. I'll be there again.
Sounds good.
Nice.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Keith Villa today, co-founder of Ceria Brewing and also the creator of Blue Moon Brewing.
Yeah. Our guests may not recognize the name Dr. Keith Villa, but he is the founder of Blue Moon, which is I think arguably the beer that got many people into, I guess, what's considered craft beer or small independent local craft beer. But Blue Moon was really one of the first craft beers, and that was back in 1995, right?
Yeah, right. That's correct. 1995 was when I launched, and it's been credited by quite a few folks and journals with helping kickstart the craft beer revolution. So yeah, it was a fun part of my life. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And you worked prior to that, you worked for Coors. It looks like you were there for 32 years total.
32 years, yes.
Wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So what was, I guess, so more on your background, you've started this pioneering brand. You have a PhD in brewing science. Mm-hmm. You got a bachelor's in molecular and cell biology. So really kind of the core of fermentation, kind of starting that as the base to make good beer from. Well, that's what you were working on when you were at Coors, sort of the molecular biology side of things?
Yeah, when I started there, it was 1986. It was literally the day after I graduated from CU Boulder, where I majored in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. And in those years, that's when gene cloning and all that stuff was just coming online. And I worked alongside professors who were ended up winning Nobel Prize and all that other stuff. So it was really, really cutting edge work, and Coors wanted to get into that. And I originally was planning to become a pediatrician. So, but I was a home brewer because, as you guys know, the Brewers Association is headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. In the old days, it used to be right down on Pearl Street, and it started. Gosh, Charlie started that in 1970. I think it was end of 78, beginning of 79, he started it, and that's when homebrewing became legal under Jimmy Carter's administration. And I started homebrewing in 1982, so that was just a few years after legalization, and I just happened to be walking on the Pearl Street Mall and saw some of the BA people there, and I saw this thing about brewing, and there were pamphlets about saying something like "learn how to home brew," and I didn't realize that you could actually do that. And so I grabbed a pamphlet, learned how to home brew, and I had fun with it. It was a really cool hobby.
Yeah.
And but it was nothing more than that. It was just a hobby because my goal was to go to medical school. And right before I graduated from undergrad at CU Boulder, Coors put up this big advertisement in the research halls where they were saying they were looking for someone to do fermentation and brewing research. And of course, I thought that sounded cool, so
Yeah.
I went and talked to them about it. And there were about 75 other students that went over there, and they said I was the most qualified. So I had to go back up to CU Boulder and ask myself if I wanted to become a doctor and work with sick people or work with beer. And so I thought I'd go work with beer at Coors for a couple years, and if I didn't like it, I'd head back to medical school. Yeah. So I was there, and I loved it. And after 2 years, that's when I told them I was going to quit and go back to Boulder to get a PhD in biochemistry, because I loved doing that type of research. And they said, well, hold on, what if we send you to Belgium to get your PhD in brewing? Because they happened to know a brewing professor over there at the University of Brussels, and he had an opening for a doctoral student. So I applied, got in, and I was there for 4 years, from 1988 to 1992, and it was well before Belgium became this international destination for beer. But nonetheless, the breweries there were fantastic, and it was just one of those times that you can reflect on and see how lucky you were. In my case, I was extremely lucky because my professor was a consultant to most of the breweries in Belgium at that time, and there were only a little over 100, probably 102 breweries back then. And we would go to breweries where he would consult. Typically they'd lay out beers on the table that we're having problems with, and he would taste them and tell them what to do to fix their problems. So whether it was the sour beers, the lambic beer breweries, or the Trappist breweries, big brewers, specialty brewers, it was just a lot of fun, and just the opportunity of a lifetime to learn about Belgian specialty brewing.
Yeah. And really taking that directly back to Colorado after you went there, I mean, Blue Moon is a Belgian-style white, or Belgian wit beer, right? And
I patterned it after the Belgian-style wits, but it's not a true-to-style Belgian wit. It's different. I used oats, and up to that time, typical wits did not use oats because they were historically correct, but they caused a lot of issues in lautering for the Belgians, and so they had stopped using them years ago. Also, they used Curacao orange peel. They did not use Valencia or Navel or any other type of orange peel. It was strictly Curacao. And what else? They used raw wheat. And so I decided to make Blue Moon with malted wheat for a little more color, flavor. I used Valencia orange peel for more of an orange flavor and aroma, and I used oats to make the mouthfeel creamy and just a little thicker than a standard wit. So yeah, it's not a true to style, but it was definitely patterned after them. And in those days, I remember there weren't very many wits in the marketplace here in the U.S. Pierre Celis had started his brewery about 2 years, I think, before I started Blue Moon. And I knew Pierre fairly well, and he would taste my beers, and he enjoyed them for what they were, which was a pseudo Belgian style beer, and also I would take beers back to Belgium to let my colleagues taste. And
What did they think of it?
they enjoyed them. Yeah, they thought they were different. Obviously, they knew it wasn't a true to style Belgian wit, but they liked it. They said this is really a great tasting beer. So it was a lot of fun just sharing those creations back then.
Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. That's cool.
Yeah.
No, go for it.
I was curious because I think, like Jeff was saying, like Blue Moon became sort of a gateway beer into craft beer for a lot of people, and even now, 25 years later, you talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I like craft beer. I love Blue Moon." And what from talking to owners and people who are working in the brewing industry in the early and mid '90s, like one of the challenges that they articulate is that you were educating people about what craft beer was, right? We had this conception of what beer had sort of been from the 60s up into the 90s when a lot of these craft breweries like New Glarus and Avery and New Belgium and things started getting open, and now suddenly we're changing the definition of beer a little bit with this craft. Did you find sort of a similar, I suppose, resistance or a similar education process that had to take place with Blue Moon as a kind of pioneer beverage?
Well, yes and no. Internally, up at the brewery in Golden, the folks really didn't care for it because they wouldn't let me brew it in Golden. I had to brew it under contract the first couple of years. I had a brewery in Utica, New York, so the FX Map Brewing Company is where I brewed it. The folks in Golden, just the senior leaders really didn't believe Blue Moon was a beer that would stick around, and so they in those days they had two new products that were in the market that were doing extremely well. One was George Killian's Irish Red, the other one was Zima, and so they put a lot of their investment in new product dollars to those two brands, and Blue Moon was kind of left to fend for itself, kind of, and so we, me and my team, we got everything set up in New York, brewed there for a couple years, and at the same time I was trying to grow that brand and get people educated, because people in those days, Belgian style beers were almost unheard of. Here we are in 2019 thinking that craft beer has always been around, but 1995 it's almost like the Stone Age for craft beer. It was really tough. I launched with a cloudy style Belgian wit. And back then, people thought I was crazy because they said, "Why are you doing that?" Because, you had Sam Adams, which looked like a beer. It was golden, filtered, nice head on it, and it was a beer. It smelled like beer. Yeah. New Belgium, their flagship was Fat Tire, and that one was, again, looked like a beer. It was an amber ale. Nothing super unique about it. So those were filtered, clear, real beautiful beers. And here comes Belgian White from Blue Moon, which looked completely different. And people thought there was a problem. So education-wise, that was the first thing, is to tell them what a Belgian-style wit was. And since we launched nationwide, I was busy on the road almost, every week, visiting states and talking to the wholesalers and retailers, doing beer dinners back when they really were not popular. There were very few people doing beer dinners back then. Myself, who else? Rob Widmer. I would see him every now and then. Who else? That's all really I saw back then. And but I would do beer dinners across the country and pair beer with food in 1995, 96, 97, and people thought I was crazy. And so that was part of the educational process too. That beers can pair with food. And I learned how to do that in Belgium because University of Brussels, the campus where I was studying was the Ceria campus, same name as our beer, but the campus, the name Ceria actually is an acronym. It stands in French for the Center for Teaching and Research in the Food Industries. And so this campus had the brewer's school, the chocolate making school, the culinary school, what else? Oh, the hotel and restaurant management school. So all those different schools were on that campus. And so you really got this cross-educational feel for everything, pairing beer with food, cooking with beer, pairing chocolate with food. And so I just applied those concepts when I got back and when I launched Blue Moon. So it was a huge educational uphill battle at times, but eventually people really started getting educated, and not just me, but other craft brewers, and the whole movement just really took on a life of its own.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too. How long does that process take from the point where you're like, okay, we have this new product out there, we have Blue Moon, there's really nothing else like it on the U.S. market. How long does it take from the point that you launch to the point where it's really becoming accepted and it's gaining traction? I think we have a lot of brewers now trying to differentiate themselves by making very, very unique products. And like we were talking about, there's a lot of education associated with that, even something like hazy IPAs, right? You mentioned a cloudy beer for the first time not being seen as a beer and people think there's something wrong with it. Kind of the same thing right now with hazy IPAs. But how long of a time gap was that? Was it a year? Was it 5 years? Was it 10 years?
You got to realize it was before social media, so everything was much slower.
Yeah.
So 1995 is when I launched, and we didn't hit critical mass until about 2001 to 2002. So it was about 6-7 years for it to finally catch on and for people to start buying it. And 2001, 2002 is when sales hit, like I said, critical mass, and we were growing almost exponentially. And we did that for several years. And but yeah, it was about 6-7 years. And in today's world with social media, of course, you can get the message across pretty quick. Yeah. And it goes back to one of the favorite quotes that I always talk about is Jim Cook from Sam Adams, or Boston Beer. He's a great speaker, but one time years ago, people accused him of having mediocre or bad beer, but just great marketing, because he was a marketing type guy. And what he said was that great marketing will only kill a bad product faster, which is true, because if you have great marketing and a bad beer, more and more people will find out about it, and then they'll give it up.
Yeah, quicker. Yeah. You'll die a quick fiery death.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. And so in the end, it's beer. I love beer. I love creating beers, and I've been in the business for a long time, and I just enjoy it.
Well, I think there's a really interesting parallel. So you retired from Blue Moon in 2018. Mm-hmm. And you started a new venture, which is really what we want to chat about with you today. And I think there's a really interesting parallel between what you've done with Blue Moon, introducing a beer that really wasn't, an appealing beer to the masses yet. There was kind of a lot of education associated with it. And now, after you retired, for some reason, you decided to launch a company and not just enjoy your retirement, but that's a question for another day. So you're creating this beverage now. You launched a new company called Ceria, and it is a de-alcoholized THC infused beer, which is a new product category, really. And it's in my mind, it seems very similar to what was going on with Blue Moon, where you're kind of creating this new product and where the market doesn't quite exist, and you're putting it out there and letting people have it and see what they think. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with this idea to create Ceria.
So yeah, after 32 years with Coors, Blue Moon, I reached what was called the rule of 85, where your age plus your years of service, if it equaled 85 or more, and you were 55 years or older, you could retire with your full pension, your 401k, your health insurance, all these things that don't exist anymore. And I hit that age, and my wife and I said, we've been in the business this long. Let's we can try something else. And when cannabis had been legalized in Colorado back in 2014, I started doing experiments at home, and I never did them at the Coors Brewery or Blue Moon, because I didn't want to risk their federal permit, their brewer's permit. And so I did stuff at home, and I figured out that you could make decent tasting alcoholic beer with cannabis, and the taste comes through loud and clear. And so my wife and I started talking, and we said, let's start a company that makes cannabis-infused beer. And as we got into it more and more, we realized that there were a lot of incredible legal hurdles you had to clear to get something in the market. First was the fact that from a federal perspective, you cannot add cannabis to alcoholic beverages because cannabis is federally illegal, or I should say marijuana, because I'm not sure if people know the difference, but cannabis is this catch-all term. Marijuana is cannabis that has more than 0.3% THC. Hemp has less than 0.3% THC. I usually just refer to it as cannabis, but when I say cannabis, I mean marijuana. And so it's federally illegal, and you can't put something federally illegal into an alcoholic beverage. So first thing was we had to figure out was how to get rid of the alcohol in our beer. Second was how to make a great tasting beer with no cannabis taste. We wanted the effects of cannabis, but the great smell and taste of a beer. Additionally, we wanted to make sure the cannabis went in very nicely, so we figured out how to make it water soluble. And then last but not least, we needed a great label and a market, the brand architecture, so we got that taken care of. And then we were able to finally launch our product at the end of 2018.
Yeah, and now it's in the market, and people can pick it up at dispensaries, but it just got put into the History Colorado Museum. Is that right?
Actually, the day after tomorrow, we'll be going with our public relations expert, Jeff Blumenfeld, and we'll be presenting some to the Colorado History Museum because it's the first THC beer in Colorado. So, yeah, it's kind of a little pioneering effort that we put forth to really get this beer product, which I do consider it a beer, get it to the masses here in Colorado and to every state where it's legal in the next few months, and just really keep changing. I like to say we're maybe I'm exaggerating, but we're constantly changing the course of beer history.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier when talking a little bit about Ceria, is that, it's still a federally illegal substance, marijuana. And is there concern? Are you concerned that someday the federal government turns around and says, look, we've decided to enforce this, right? It's a level 1 controlled substance, and the state doesn't have the right to say what it says, and that's it.
Possible, but if I back up, the name is actually Ceria, rhymes with area. So that's because we've had a lot of people call it Ceria, all these different pronunciations, but it's Ceria, rhymes with area. And yeah, there's that fear by some folks that the federal government, may reverse course and start enforcing all the laws on cannabis and saying, sorry, no more. And but from our perspective, we're very hopeful and confident that the horses are already out of the barn. I mean, you've got California legalized, you've got Colorado, you've got all these states with recreational legalization, and then the other ones with medical. And there are so many. It's just almost mind-boggling to think where we are in today's world of cannabis. And additionally, when you look at polls, you see that regardless of your political stands, Democrat or Republican, the majority of voters believe that cannabis should be legalized recreationally. So I don't see any reversal of course. And you're right, it could happen possibly, but I think chances are very, very low. And then when you compound that with the revenue that the states get from cannabis, the taxes, which almost always are very high, 24, 25, 26% sales tax, that's very enticing for governments to pass up.
Sure, yeah. Well, we were saying cannabis in 2017, the legal industry was a $9 billion industry.
Yeah.
Right, and it's already a third of the craft beer industry nationwide. So, yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, you have 46 states that have some sort of medical marijuana already. But I was curious, as an entrepreneur, it's like, how do you evaluate those risks?
Right.
Yeah.
Because any business has a risk of success or failure, but it gets compounded with heavily regulated industries like alcohol production, like cannabis. It definitely adds another layer of complexity, I think. But I think there's a lot of overlap too in the two market segments as far as what people enjoy imbibing in to socialize, you know. And I'm kind of curious who is your target market? Who is it the person who's consuming this, and what's the social situation that they're consuming it, right? Because it has about 5 milligrams of THC. It's packaged as a beer product, but you probably only have one of them, I would assume. Who's your target market there?
So we do have more products coming in near future, an IPA with 10 milligrams and a light lager with 2.5. But to answer your question about who is our consumer, it really is everybody 21 and over. Those are our consumers because if you look at our motto on our label, you'll see the Roman goddess of fertility, the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of grains, even cannabis would be in there too. So her name is Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture. And immediately in front of her face, you'll see our motto, which says Cannabis Pro Omnibus, which is Latin for cannabis for the people. So what we want to do is bring legal cannabis in a socially acceptable form to everybody 21 and older who wants to enjoy it. And so our demographic is really everybody over 21. And in fact, we get a lot of college kids who are 21 enjoying our product. But we also were surprised at how many veterans, military veterans, buy our product because they either can no longer drink alcohol, or they're on medication which prohibits them drinking alcohol, or they just don't like the taste of alcohol anymore. And so they turn to our product and they love it. And we also get people who are looking to be calorie conscious because, as you know, calories are mainly driven by the alcohol content. The higher the alcohol, the higher the calories. And when you remove the alcohol in our product, you've got 64 calories, which, when people are counting calories, that's a pretty low calorie count for a beverage, a malt beverage. And so we have a lot of people who drink our product who we didn't know would end up drinking it. So it's been a very pleasant surprise for us.
Yeah. Well, and do you consider this may be splitting hairs just a little bit, but does it fall into the sort of non-alcoholic beer camp, or is it something completely different?
So the beer is brewed as a beer. So we brew it. It's brewed as a Belgian-style white ale. We brew it with malted barley, malted wheat, oats, blood orange peel, and coriander, and hops.
I feel like I've heard that recipe earlier. I don't know. I'm not sure where that could come from.
So we brew it, and then we remove the alcohol, and our machinery allows us to go down to 0.0 if the government, when it does become federally legal, if our government said, okay, you can put cannabis in these beverages, but they've got to be 0.0. Right now, the state of Colorado says it's got to be less than 0.5% ABV. So that's where we are, is less than 0.5. But our machinery allows us to go down to 0.0 if the federal government requires that. So we remove the alcohol, we infuse it with THC with no cannabis flavors, and net result is you get this product that smells and tastes like a Belgian-style white ale, but has the effects of cannabis. And we've been pleasantly surprised, as I said, at the number of people who buy it and enjoy it. One other surprising fact about our demographic is we get quite a few young 21, 25 females, because there's a lot of young people who would love to try cannabis, but one of their greatest fears is losing control. They don't want to get stoned, wake up the next morning, and then go on social media and find all these pictures of them in compromising positions or whatever. Because I mean that's there forever, and they don't want to do that. They want to make sure they stay in control. So that's one of the biggest fears of people who have never had cannabis before. And so what we say is, hey, at 5 milligrams, that's not enough to get stoned, but for some people who are new to it, you'll get a buzz similar to the buzz you get from probably a 7% IPA, drinking a glass of it. you get this feeling of, it's just a intoxication, but it's a pleasant, relaxed feeling from THC.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting too because you're very much modeling this. You know, the whole theme of the month is this beer, and you're very much it is a beer. It starts as a beer. You remove the alcohol, you add the THC, and it kind of becomes this essentially the same type of beverage, but the type of buzz you get from it is slightly modified. I think it's interesting. That's kind of one approach to it. I think it's interesting too that there's other breweries kind of using cannabis in a different way. You said earlier that there's sort of the hemp side of cannabis and the marijuana side of cannabis. There are some places I know of that are using hemp because I think hemp seeds and hemp fibers are some of the few ingredients that the TTB actually allows as a certified addition to beer. But that's very much a different product in that it's trying to smell and taste like cannabis, where this is very much not trying to smell and taste like cannabis, but provide similar effects to cannabis.
You're absolutely correct. We don't want to smell and taste like cannabis because what we found is the smell and taste of cannabis is very polarizing, meaning people either really love it or they really don't like it. And the amount of people who love it are definitely in the minority. Just a rough guess is probably, I don't know, a quarter of the people who like cannabis love that smell, and most don't like the smell and taste of it. And you're right, the beers, the alcoholic beers that are out there that have hemp in them, some of them are very, very fragrant and smell like cannabis. I mean, they reek of cannabis. And but to me, I would say if you want the smell and taste of cannabis, you really should have the THC. It's almost like if you woke up in the morning and you wanted your cup of coffee to get started because you're really dragging, and you drink it and find out somebody made decaf. It's like
that's the worst.
Yeah,
It's the worst.
It's like, what happened?
You're off coffee duty forever.
Yeah.
That's true.
I drink decaf coffee, by the way. I'm just saying.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, I really do.
But it's the expectation, right? You expect to drink decaf coffee.
Yeah, that's true. But I'll tell you this much, and it's Jay here. Sorry to chime in on this, but I'll tell you this much. And the same thing with non-alcoholic beer, because I don't drink alcohol, so I'll enjoy a non-alcoholic beverage from time to time. And I'll say this. You are shamed more for drinking decaffeinated coffee than anything in the world. As far when people find out, right? They look at you like you have a contagious disease, and they don't want to get. And they're like, "Hey, listen, man, I can't hang out with you because I don't want to start drinking decaf because nobody does that. Only freaks, you know." So I drink decaf, but that's my 2
Caffeine
cents.
is so I cannot get going without like a super strong cup of coffee. I can't imagine doing any decaf. But I kind of on that same vein, decaffeinating coffee and de-alcoholizing beer. As an engineer, I kind of want to dig into the technical side a little bit of the process because it seems really interesting.
Can I interrupt you just for a second because we've got so just to remind people that we're live on Facebook, and if you have questions about THC infused beer or questions about anything that Keith Villa that you'd like Dr. Keith Villa to answer, please feel free to reach out on Facebook, and we'll try to get those questions answered. So before we get too far into some of the technical aspects of creating the product, one of our Facebook viewers was curious. There's a lot of conversation in craft beer right now about the level of alcohol, and the average level of alcohol in beer is going down. People seem to want a beer that they can, drink 8 or 10 or 12 of and still mow the grass, and still hang out at the football game with their friends. Does that fit in this space? Can you drink 6 of these? Should you only have 2 of them?
Of course, with our products, as with any other cannabis or alcoholic products, you always do it responsibly, always consume responsibly. For us, it does depend on the amount of experience any particular user has, because there are some people who can actually consume quite a few milligrams of THC and still be fully competent, at least appear to be competent. And those are some real experienced users. And there's others who are just getting into it, or even people who have used it for a long time that are just very sensitive, and they can get stoned, with very small amounts. So it's a real individual choice. But what we what we have chosen to do for our products is to stay on the low dosed and the microdosed side, because for us that's where all of the sociability is. Sure, if people want to get stoned, by all means, there are numerous avenues in the cannabis world to do that. You just buy a dab unit and buy some concentrate, and my gosh, you'll get stoned. But that's not what we're all about. We're about sociability. Just socializing with friends, family. We're about using our product responsibly and staying in control. Because, with your dab unit, you could be alone in your basement, or maybe it's your mom's basement. I don't know. But you could be down there with your dab unit and getting high, getting stoned. How sociable is that? And, how much in control is that? For us, it really is. It's about socializing and staying in control and having fun, because that's what we're all about. And that's where we see the future, is in these low-dosed and microdose products, because we see it as very much emulating the alcohol world. If you look at alcohol and you wanted to get drunk, if you would look at typically one thing, the price per ounce of alcohol. And here in the Denver market, you'd probably check out, okay, beer is this much, wine is this much, but if I wanted to get drunk, there's cheap vodkas out there that'll do the job at the perfect lowest price per ounce of alcohol.
But that's not what you're going for. You're trying to make a delicious craft beer beverage that people can enjoy the taste of and also have a little bit of a buzz from, right?
That is exactly it. Just like craft beer. Craft beer is very expensive. People can choose to go buy vodka, but if you want the social experience, the flavor, the variety, you go to craft beer. And what we're doing is saying, if you want cannabis in a socially acceptable format, very low dose, so you stay in control, you know how much you're ingesting, that's where we're going to play. And we're going to have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. There's an interesting time delay component that I kind of want to touch on too, which is a big difference between alcohol, how alcohol absorbs into the body, and how THC infuses into the body, right? Because if you have a beer and it's a 5% beer, you'll feel it in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on the strength of it. But this takes a little bit longer to get into your system, right?
Yeah. So with alcohol, you're right. If you've got nothing in your stomach, you can feel it fairly soon. If you have some food in your stomach, it'll take a while. 10, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes with alcohol. So it's fairly fast acting. With cannabis, in particular edibles, those can take up to an hour and a half or 2 hours. What we use is a water-soluble THC that starts going into your system the minute it hits your soft tissues in your mouth. So it starts absorbing, and it's low-dosed. So by the time you finish a bottle of our product, from that time roughly, it's going to take maybe 10 to 15 minutes for you to finally start feeling it. So if you were to slam a bottle of our product, then you start feeling it sooner. But beer is one of those socializing things, and it might take you, 5-10 minutes to finish our bottle, and then after that, it'll be about another 10-15 minutes before you start feeling the effects.
Yeah, that kind of comes back to that education component, because I think most people, when they think of edibles, they think of fat-soluble THC, which I believe has to go through your liver before it gets dissolved into your bloodstream. And it sounds like this, however you go about making it water-soluble, kind of changes that and really cuts down on the typical time that people are used to.
That's correct. Yeah, it speeds it up so that it goes into your system faster. And it's, there's a whole science behind this stuff, and it's cutting edge. But bottom line for us is we want a product that really mimics alcoholic beer, but again is low dose, so you stay in control and you make it fun to socialize.
So how I gotta know how it's made. Right? I've talked to a lot of home brewers who are interested or who use cannabis in beer, and a lot of them will essentially dry hop with it. A lot of times they'll decarboxylate it to activate the THC. They'll heat it up and then they'll put it in the beer, which is a thing that you can do and apparently works. But when you don't have alcohol as a solvent, how does that work in the process? So
you can boil it. You can brew with it actually, and that does a couple things. Like you said, you have to activate it in order for it to get into your system and work, because when you decarboxylate it through heat, it turns into its active THC form, and that's when it becomes an intoxicant. And unlike alcohol, but the nice part about THC is that it just acts on the mind, or that is I guess it's a mental type of buzz versus alcohol, which is a general muscle relaxant. So there are some people that actually can consume THC and then go run a marathon, and they claim it helps them. But you would never do that after consuming alcohol because, I mean, your heart couldn't take it. But with THC and making non-alcoholic beers, so yeah, the key to making good non-alcoholic beers from a home brewer's perspective is they typically don't have the place to put the machinery to remove alcohol. So the easiest way is to use some of these specialty yeasts that yeast labs are coming up with that don't ferment, or that ferment to a very limited amount. And that's the fastest, easiest way for homebrewers to get into non-alcoholic beer. You just make your recipe. Typically, you hot mash to limit the amount of fermentables in it. Put in these specialty yeasts, and they'll ferment to a small amount, and you have a beer with anywhere from, I'd say, 1% ABV and below. So you've got nice low alcohol beers, and you could control it to stay below that 0.5%. But you're practically there, and from a homebrewer's perspective, that's really close. And then they can put in the THC, and THC is an oil, so it will separate. Even if alcohol's there, that doesn't really make it go into solution, because you could put it into beer, and you'll see a separation. It's like mixing water and oil. So the key is, how do you get it to solubilize? And that's the part that I can't talk about our water solubilization process, but I can say that there are some ways to emulsify it. So that's another way to do it, is just find an emulsifier.
That's what I was just thinking when you mentioned that it's separated and you have to keep them together. I'm thinking of salad dressing, right? You have oil, you have vinegar or water, and you have to find something that will help emulsify and kind of keep the two stable together.
Kind of like chocolate too. Chocolate is an oil; it's a fat, and so if you look at the back of any ingredient panel of a chocolate bar, lecithin is typically soy lecithin is used, and it's an emulsifier. It keeps things together, keeps them from separating. So yeah, you've got to do that, and so there are some technologies out there where cannabis oils are emulsified using certain ingredients, and usually a lot of heavy-duty mixing, and then all of a sudden you have this cloudy cannabis solution that you can put into liquids, but it will be cloudy. That's the issue. Our beer here is unfiltered, and it is naturally cloudy. But our IPA and our light lager are filtered, so that's where you'll really see the beauty of our water-soluble THC.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely a couple steps above. If you want to make a very similar product, what a home brewer could probably do at home, unless you do a hot mash like you're talking about, and kind of just keep the alcohol low by not having alcohol. How much alcohol does this beer have before it gets removed?
It's got about 6%.
About 6%.
So for every batch that we do it in 100-barrel batches. So every batch we remove that, we end up with about 150 gallons of alcohol. That's typically 40-50% ABV, which would be 80 to 100 proof.
So when do you open up Ceria distillery? Seems like you have a waste stream that's perfect to open up a distillery with.
We certainly have thought about that, so we'll see. We'll see what happens with that.
Do you use can you talk about the process to remove it? Is it a distillation process, or is it different?
Yeah, there's different ways of removing it. You can use reverse osmosis. You could use vacuum distillation, and we've said before in some of the press interviews that we've done that we use vacuum distillation because it really maintains a lot of the flavor, and it allows you to go all the way down to 0.0. And in our case, if the government ever forces that on us, all we have to do is flip a switch, and we're at 0.0. Right now, I dial it in at about 0.4, because I want the maximum amount of flavor in there without being illegal and going above 0.5% ABV. So it's zero point 0.4 is typically what we're running. And like I said, though, we can get down to 0.0 if the government requires us to.
So, I mean, I'd love to talk about the flavor. For those of our viewers who haven't had it, what does it taste like? I think you kind of touched on it. Alcohol does add a certain flavor to beer. It adds a mouthfeel for sure. How does a beer taste without alcohol when it's vacuum distilled?
Typically, it tastes okay. It doesn't taste quite like an alcoholic beer, but we've figured out a way to make ours smell and taste pretty close to the starting point. Yeah, it's for us it is proprietary, but we've had a lot of great feedback from our fans and from a lot of people who have tried our product, and they're amazed at how close to beer it tastes like, that it tastes like a beer. And for us, that's music to our ears, because we worked really hard on this. And I mean, it's just a small family-owned, family-run business in Arvada, Colorado, and so we're real happy that we were able to create a non-alcoholic beer that tastes like beer and has the effects of cannabis. So yeah, it makes us happy.
Yeah, honestly, I'm really excited to see when the IPA comes out. I think that would, because you get so much flavor from hops as an ingredient that it can really help. I would think it would really kind of make the flavor way more intense and really in line with what people are used to when they think about beer. I mean, IPAs make up, 25% of the beer market.
Yeah, we do have ours ready to go. It's a West Coast IPA, and it's ready to go. We just are working on the final label for it, and it should be ready for the market sometime this summer. But it's all depends on the label, getting all that right, because once you have the art and everything finished, then you have to go through a lot of approvals here in Colorado for cannabis products. So it does take quite a bit of time.
Is it easier to work with cannabis regulation or TTB?
TTB for sure, because beer is beer. It's amazing, and I think that's what one of the reasons that we have over 7,000 breweries here in the U.S., because it's just so easy to get into it. Literally, you don't have to pass some legal requirement that says you are a true brewmaster because you have this and this. You could be a plumber, a banker, a lawyer, whatever, and then just the next day say you're a brewer, a brewmaster. There's no legal requirement, so it's very easy to get in and start a craft brewery. And the tough part is making great beer time and time again. It's very difficult to make high-quality beer, quality meaning it's the exact same that you brewed it time and time again. And that's difficult, but yeah, it's easier becoming a brewer than becoming a cannabis master, or I don't know what the name is.
We have to create a name for that.
The Cicerone organization for cannabis.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be thinking about that.
Yeah. It's sommelier of cannabis.
Sommelier of cannabis. Yeah. It's a little tough to. You might just lose track after the first little bit there. I don't know.
Hard to swirl and spit, I imagine.
Yeah.
I'll have to contact Ray Daniels.
Yeah.
He started the Cicerone program, and see if he can come up with a cool name for a similar thing for cannabis.
Yeah. But you can't inhale. That's the key. It's like tasting and spitting with wine. You can't inhale. Great. Well, yeah, man, there's so much.
I have a question, Jay here, if I could just jump
Jay?
in. When you guys were getting into how to take, and you mentioned vacuum distillation to take the alcohol out. So here's my question, and I haven't had this product, but why traditionally, and it sounds like it's a somewhat easy process if you've got the machinery to do it. So why are the non-alcoholic beers that you traditionally find, don't taste what the taste you want from a beer? I mean, is it because all the alcohol's gone, so it's that's the bottom line, is that, well, there's not alcohol in it, or is there something else going on to where they don't want to invest enough product or resources to put into a product that's going to taste closer to something that's more enjoyable, I guess you could say? And I'm going from the O'Douls of the world and the things like that to where I'll drink them and it's like, yeah, they taste like a beer for a second. and then you're like, okay, it's not a beer. Kind of the same thing with decaf coffee, where it tastes like coffee for a second,
Tricked me for a minute, but not forever.
Yeah, and then you're like, but
tired.
that's not. There's no caffeine in that. I mean, is there something to that, or am I crazy?
No, you're absolutely right, because for the longest time here in the United States, there really wasn't a market for non-alcoholic beer. If you look at it, the sales were minuscule compared to alcoholic beer. Europe is different because the laws there changed pretty radically to the point where if you get caught with almost any alcohol in your system driving, you could go to jail and face some serious jail time. Here in the States, for the longest time, it was a slap on the hand. Now it's getting tougher, and that's why you're seeing the advent of better non-alcoholic beers. But for the longest time, it was basically a corporate responsibility play to offer a non-alcoholic beer. So, because most people weren't drinking non-alcoholic beers, so that's why the flavor was never really there. It was okay, but that's where you see the advent of the Europeans making really great tasting non-alcoholic products, because there was a need for it. People wanted that so they could go out, socialize, and drive and be responsible and not end up in jail. And so that's where most of the technology started. Certainly the vacuum distillation technology, all these great new yeasts that have limited fermentation capacity, those have been started in Europe really because of the need over there.
Yeah, when I think something you said earlier about also the low calories, right? All of the incoming data about millennials and the generation behind them that's drinking alcohol is they're much more invested in the health, in health generally. So they don't want the Russian Imperial Stout that's 14% that has 720 calories in a 10-ounce glass, even though it's delicious. They're interested in something that they can drink and still be responsible, but also not imbibe. Go out for a night drinking and imbibe 4,000 calories.
You're right there too, because we're seeing more and more young people becoming what they call selectively sober, whether it's temporarily or permanently or semi-permanently, and really it's the health aspects where they look and they see some of the damaging things that alcohol does to the body, and some people, whether it's having a foggy thought process or actually having harm done to your liver. I mean, there's all these things they point to, and most people we talk to who are drinking our products have chosen to limit the amount of alcohol they drink, and it's just one of those things that's happening. We see it as a long-term trend that's happening in our society, and that's another reason why we have our products out, because we think they're great tasting non-alcoholic products that happen to have cannabis in them, and people really enjoy the flavor of them.
Yeah. When I said we tried it the other day, it was great, and I just love the whole idea of it, because we talk about this a lot, where it's like, using any other kind of spice adjunct flavor, right? It's a IPA that happens to have basil in it, right? So I appreciate your wording, because I think that the way that a lot of people are thinking about some of these different flavors in beer, whether it's, Chinese 5-spice or cannabis, right? We're thinking about it in different ways than previously.
Yeah, and some people think about it as like a flavor difference in the beer, but you can also have kind of the effect, the chemical effect difference in the beer. But I love it because it's like beer is this great, platform essentially. There's such a wide market of folks who really enjoy beer, and I think as beer grows, it's really gonna it's already doing this. It's already filling out to be appeasing to more people in very specific ways, and I like how it's expanding and changing. I think I wonder if I'm just trying to think beer traditionally. You're used to seeing it on the liquor store shelves, right? Do you see that as a barrier? I know that there's a lot of, obviously there's legal reasons that you can't have this on a liquor store shelf. One, doesn't have any alcohol in it, so not to say they don't sell non-alcoholic things in liquor stores, but what are you looking forward to, as far as laws changing to really make this more easily available or widespread product?
The first one is the banking law, so that so that you don't have mountains of cash floating around, because that's never a good thing.
That was my question. For you. Where do you keep all your money?
Yeah, that's not a good thing to have boatloads of cash just in trucks and cars and in buildings. So the banking laws have to be changed, and I think that will lead. That'll be the first thing. And luckily, we have a great congressman right here in Colorado, Ed Perlmutter, who's really been spearheading a lot of the pro-cannabis legislation, as well as Cory Gardner. I mean, our governor Polis. I mean, Colorado is one of the most progressive states in the country when it comes to cannabis, and so we've got that. But definitely the banking laws have to be changed, and of course it has to get off the list of what is it, Schedule 1. Schedule 1, yeah. So it's got to get off that list and become legal. And once we have that, I think you'll still see a separation between the alcoholic world and the cannabis world. It's just that the cannabis will come from being illegal to all of a sudden legal, but separate. I don't think we'll ever see in our lifetimes the day when a store is selling our products right next to alcoholic products. I think there's going to be a separation for a long, long time until the government thoroughly studies it and figures out if it's truly safe or not. We think it is safe, but I think you have to have all that scientific data for the government to finally make their decision, and then you have to convince people. So that's going to take years. So I think we'll always see a separation. You'll see dispensaries grow and become more like regular stores that offer regular products and cannabis-based products, and then you'll see stores selling regular products and alcoholic products. So I think there's going to be a separation for a long time. But for us, the banking laws are the first things to change. Then after that, I think it's just downhill.
Yeah. I remember reading shortly after marijuana was legalized in Colorado that people were literally taking their cash to laundromats and washing it so that it wouldn't have that smell we were talking about earlier, so that they could then try to take it to the bank.
Laundering.
So they were literally laundering the money in order to get it into the bank.
So it wouldn't have the odor associated with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's one of the reasons I'm interested in sort of these other ways of consumption, because like for me I'm in that larger group of people that hate the smell, right? And I remember talking to people who were like, I want marijuana to be legal, but I don't want to smell it everywhere, right? It's like I can't smell it if you're, drinking in your house or drinking in your bar or whatever. So I think for that reason too, I'm really excited about sort of the expansion of this.
Yeah, and I think another thing we'll look forward to is on-premise consumption of cannabis, which I think will be huge. We already have our product ready to go in one-way kegs, which we think is the future of cannabis, having really nice on-premise consumption lounges or bars, whatever you want to call them, and go in for a beer and hang out, watch sports, whatever. But I think on-premise is going to be really huge. And unfortunately, California and Nevada are ahead of Colorado when it comes to legalizing on-premise. And so they may take the jump on us, but hopefully we'll get it legalized here in the near future, and we'll be able to have bars that serve our product on tap.
And you mentioned Nevada and California. As far as interstate commerce goes, is that something that Ceria is working on, or are there other barriers that are preventing you from going over state lines?
Yeah, you can't. Once you have a product that's infused with cannabis, you can't cross state lines. So we've been so successful in Colorado that we are going to be in the Nevada market and the California market within about 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
We'll be launching over there. So it's going to go quickly. It's interesting because you have to set up shop in each state, and at the same time, if you don't want to fully set up shop, you partner with somebody. So that's what we're doing, is we're partnering, finding the right people, signing all the contracts, and then you launch. But we're still kind of in the infancy of this whole industry. It's growing, and we're trying to figure out things as we move along. Certainly with the advent of our product, a cannabis beer, that's very new, and so there's a lot of hurdles that we've had to cross, and a lot of things we've had to invent along the way to get our product on the shelf. But and every time I see it in dispensaries, I always think, it's crazy because I think, hey, this is coming from this little family-owned company in Arvada, Colorado. And I remember when I launched Blue Moon, I was launching it around the world, and I remember launching it in Australia, Japan, Chile, and seeing it on the shelf and thinking, man, that came all the way from Colorado by a guy who's from Arvada, Colorado. So yeah, it's a
That's a cool feeling. The first time you see that thing that you've worked so hard actually on the shelf, you're like, people can buy this.
Yeah.
It actually happened.
Yeah,
I made this.
It's a great feeling.
It's
yeah,
an incredible feeling. Absolutely.
Yeah, and where can people buy it if they want to try it?
if they're over 21, they can go to pretty much any dispensary in the Denver metro area and around Colorado too. So especially the big chains. We're in all the big cannabis dispensary chains. And what we try to do is get people to buy 4-packs of it because, yes, you can buy it by the single bottle, but for us, it's all about enjoying and being social. So we try to sell it in 4-packs. And for now, it's 4-packs. In the future, we may do 6-packs. And then we're also moving to cans. When we launched with, these are aluminum bottles because part of the regulations say that customers should not be able to see the contents inside. So you either have to put a sleeve that makes the contents completely not visible, or you package in something like an aluminum bottle. And the other thing is you have to have child-proof openers. So with the recreational market, when you're 10 milligrams and below on a single serve, it's got to be child-proof. If it's above 10 but below 100, it has to be childproof but resealable and also come with a serving device where you can serve out 10 milligram servings. So it's real complex. And so the laws and regulations are complex, but it's something that we just are working on all the time and really trying to get our products out in a safe manner for the people of Colorado.
Now, I think we've got time for one more Facebook question. On Facebook, someone asks, what's the care of it? Is it like beer? Do you have to refrigerate it? Is the shelf life similar? How do we take care of it?
It's beer with the alcohol removed and then replaced with cannabis. So you should treat it like beer. So when you buy it, you refrigerate it, and I like to keep mine at about 34 degrees and then serve it at 34 because the colder it is, I think at least with this product, it's really nice and refreshing. When we have our IPA out, that one should be served a little bit warmer to bring out all the hop aromas. But treat it definitely like beer.
Great.
Well, great. Well, Dr. Villa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. You can call me Keith. Yeah.
We've made it. We've made it to the first name basis.
Yeah. I'm going to need a letter of recommendation for that university in Belgium later, too. The chocolate food beer pairing courses.
Well, it's funny, because the university over there, Belgium is a socialized country. And you would think it was a fortune to go there to get a PhD in brewing. But I was looking at some tax records. When was it? It was 2 years ago. I was looking through some old tax records before getting rid of them because it's been years. But I was looking, and the annual yearly tuition at the University of Brussels to get a PhD in brewing amounted to about $98. So it was dirt cheap because it's socialized.
Wow. I'm moving to Belgium.
Yeah, calling my business partner. All right, well, thank you to everyone who's been following along on Facebook. We will be back with Alex Liberati of Liberati talking about Oino beers and beer wine hybrids. And we'll be sort of continuing on looking at some of these products that are pushing the boundaries of beer, these new styles of beer. And so I'm excited to see where we're going.
Yeah, me too. Lots of fun stuff coming up for the rest of this month and into next month. So join us next week, and this has been Beercraft.